should be.
Okay, well, I'm in Central Park with Mark Cloudfoot Gershon, and we've got some music, theme music in the background, but we're going to lose that as we start to walk away. So,
We're walking.
yeah, let's walk. So, let's start. Well, I'll actually ask you what you said to me when we met before, which is how did you get started with the Toltec path?
It's hard to say. It might have been when I first started working at Columbia. There was a book, Fire from Within, that sort of appeared. Right? And I read it. It was very fascinating. I had read Carlo's books before, but this just sort of appeared. And I said I'm going to read it again. Then, so one of my associates at work said, there's a fellow, Carlos Castaneda, that's living in the dormitory with his wife here. And his wife is taking the medical school, going to medical school. So, and they just moved out, so you just missed him. So I said, oh, that's funny. There's sort of synchronicity in that thing. Weird things started happening ever since. So just reading the book. It's a weird thing. So a lot of my youth was spent in psychedelia. Many psychonautic excursions. So and, it brought me to a lot of questions about, it was sort of like an awakening. And, it seems like the question always brings about more questions, And ever since I asked why, my life has been giving me more questions, more answers, and it's an interesting experience. So, I came to a certain realization about my existence, the whys and wherefores of it, and taking further, depth into meditation and practicing movements and brought me deeper. And but I still had things that plagued me, like when I was born. Right? I still have this memory of when I was born. In that experience, it was just before being born, I was coming through into this lifetime in full consciousness. So without understanding or reason to know why. But I was doing it. And all of a sudden, as I was going through, I was attacked. By what, I don't know. It just had a very large beak, and it slashed my energy field. So it's like a slash. And I was able to come in pretty much conscious, but with a gaping wound. I had since come to understand through studying some of Castaneda's work, through my own process of recapitulation, through further, a study of dreams, that this was a project, a task that seers take to be able to come into a world fully conscious, to sort of build an unbending intent in that sense. That's the task of a warrior, to build a sense of unbending intent in some way that takes you into a lifetime. Right? So,
Do you remember anything before you were born? Do you remember where you came from before that?
well, it was pretty much that void, it was pretty much in that, trying to just come into the lifetime consciously without, going to sleep.
Okay.
That was the intent. That's all I particularly remember.
Well, you mean without losing lucidity in a way when you
Yes.
come into this life? So
But then the attack happened, and that I remember waking up in my baby body, and I was like dreaming, and I had all these visions, and a lot of them are coming out during the process of this lifetime.
uh-huh.
So, uh, you get to understand more as you proceed. Things click together. From that from that moment, I recapitulate that often to see if I can squeeze out a little more. So, I go backwards into it. I go forwards into it. You can kind of sort of control the movement in the dream occasionally. But sometimes it's very stubborn, because that entity that I've come to call the adversary.
The adversary?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
the adversary is always in there. Right?
This was what attacked you, the adversary?
Yes, that
Uh-huh.
is the adversary. That's the attacker. It will attack anything that tries to get through this membrane into this world in a conscious way.
Right. This
So,
is the dreaming membrane?
yes.
And is there more than one membrane? Does each person have one and the world have one? And
Well, it's a layered onion.
okay.
There's many layers to it. And what convolutes it is this little hole in the energy field that Carlos called the gap. It complicates the issue.
Uh-huh.
It makes a schism in perception. So as long as you have that little hole in your energy field, you're not going to be able to perceive the full truth.
Uh-huh.
So eliminating that hole allows you to see the truth.
Can you eliminate it completely in a lifetime?
Well, it takes that. It's possible. So, I don't think I'll be able to do it this lifetime.
Okay.
It's quite complicated. I'm going to have to go through the death experience again and try to get through with a better, a less of a slash in my energy field, because that's complicated the whole issue altogether. Right? You have this big splash, and occasionally it bleeds.
It bleeds.
It bleeds.
And how does that manifest in this life?
In various ways. I have to really be mindful of my vitality.
Mindful of your
Vitality.
Vitality.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
You cannot take your attention off your vitality. I have to keep impeccable tabs on it.
So can you give me an idea of this? What are the sorts of, I know you write a lot about this, but what are the parameters and what are the sorts of things you have to do to conserve vitality?
Well, that's a very individual thing. You have to utilize the resources of the world that you're in, first of all. And then you have to utilize the resources of alternate dimensions as well. So you somehow have to balance the two. And that is not an easy proposition. So you have to learn a lot of different things. You know, the type of knowledge you have to learn is the use of plant medicines, the use of minerals, the use of of points of acupuncture points, pressure points, and things like that. Those all come into a lot of useful things.
Yeah, you mentioned yin and yang, and you mentioned various aspects, various terms which come from Chinese philosophy or the Chinese cosmology.
Uh-huh.
Is that? I mean, does that and qi play a part in the
Well,
in the
qi
vitality?
is just another word for energy.
Uh-huh.
And energy is linked, and we are sentient beings. It's all linked in with sentience. Sentience is one part energy, one part awareness, and one part intent. Those three are inextricably linked. So if you have awareness, it is awareness of energy and intent. It's all tied together. Energy is linked in with intent and awareness. It's all tied together. That gives us an edge. Sentient beings have that edge. We just don't use the full dynamic of that edge. Why? Because we don't know about it. And a lot of it is hidden.
Is when you talk of the dream of the world, I mean, is that in some way equivalent to culture? You know, I mean, let's think of Terence McKenna saying culture is not your friend. You know, we are acculturated away from our pristine being, if you like.
Well,
And
what creates the dream of the world? It's being frozen in a biological form that creates a certain perception and necessity as a result of that perception. That necessity, is called need, and that translates eventually into greed, right? And that's you can look at our sort of cultural / social structure. It all revolves around need and greed, right? There are very few people who are just, satisfied with what they have. Yeah. The ideal is to have more than you need. Right? That's the sort of dream of the world. You know?
so,
And it's about it's a fiction created by the mold of man.
what is the mold of man?
The mold of man is a prototype of human form. Right? We have imagined this form to be the divinity. Right? It's what's creates. We create law out of it. Right? We create how we interact with our fellow beings. So we create societies, we create culture, we create, all these necessities out of this particular form, because the form itself is deficient. Watch out for that.
Oh yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm.
our basis of our existence is deficiency, right? And that is not the right place to start. Where we should start is in sufficiency.
Right.
Right?
But how do you do that?
Nobody's given that chance.
No, it's like the Irish when you ask a question. How do I get to Dublin from here? It says, well, if that's where you're trying to go, I wouldn't start from here.
So the whole what we're taught in an entire lifetime is how to be deficient. Right? Even if you're rich, you are deficient.
Yeah.
Right. How do you be sufficient? That is the question. That's a hard one to, especially in the dream of the world. Sufficiency is hidden. Right? It's the wise man knows what sufficiency is. And most people look for the wise man to ask him other questions on how to be sufficient. They ask him, how do I get more money? How do I get more cars? Or how do I get... This is not... You should have money, of course. You need money to operate in this society. And it's not going to disappear anytime soon. Right? You might have ideals that a moneyless society, but it's not going to disappear.
Right.
Right? So you have to learn how to be sufficient in it.
So this whole New Age thing about abundance and the law of attraction is a complete distraction from what you actually need to be getting on with, right?
Well, that's all about developing a comfort zone in the dream of the world.
Right.
Right? So you think this is your home, but it's only a temporary abode. So here you want to develop an eternity here in this world. It's not going to happen, right? Because we are creatures of transition, right? We're not going to last long anywhere because we change. And when we change, our perception changes. And when our perception changes, a new assemblage occurs, right? So in order to be to maintain anything, you have to be able to maintain your perception. Right? And that brings a different kind of riches. Right? If you can maintain your perception, if you're a master of perception, right? A master of awareness, then you realize that this is just one dream among many other dreams. And it's a dream that is sort of a fiction. There are more advanced dreams.
What can you tell us about, while we're on the subject, what about the dream of the planet? How do you differentiate that from the dream
That's
of the
a more
world?
advanced dream. We have a connection to that in our subjective world through our dream. Right? If we know how to read it. It talks to us in a very cryptic language. So it's a learning process even to be able to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's going to speak to you, and most of the time you don't understand what it's saying. So
One of the questions from one of the people, I think it was Al Fishman, was what is the relationship between human and the planet? Does that relate to what we're talking about here? What's the relationship to the planet?
You're one of the thought forms of the planet. You're just one of the thought forms. There are many other thought forms. Our subjective supremacy, doesn't look into the subjectivity of other life forms. We think that we are the king, the top of the evolution. It's not true. We're very feeble, in that sense. All we do have is that's working for us is thumbs, that allows us to manipulate the environment better than any other creature. And so we create buildings and cultures and societies that are in a prophecy of our ruination. In a prophecy of our ruination. They're prophetic of our ruination. They, alienation, right? Suppression of the creative spirit. These are all depression. How many people are truly happy in this environment? But even happiness is a sort of idle comfort somewhere.
Yeah.
What we really need, what all our needs that we are deficient in, the reason why we have those is because we are truly deficient in adventure.
Let's move away from these noisy people because it's getting in the recording. Let's move away because they're rattling these bells all the time.
In exploration. Right? This is what we really need in the area of self-discovery. The only reason why we need to survive is for that, to have that adventure of delving into the depths of ourselves.
Can I? Maybe this is, perhaps this is a natural progression. But can I ask you about the apprenticeship to the Death Defier? I mean, how does that relate to all of this? I mean, how did it come about, and how is that related to what you're saying?
Well, it happened through dreams. After I started rereading the Castaneda again, started practicing some of the dreaming practices, and I contacted some various entities, one of which was a being that I called Q. Okay? And he was a luminous being, and he sort of
It's getting noisy.
As a result of the only thing I really had was these a wilting body, right, that energy was oozing out of me. I was going into a really decrepit state at an early age. So all I had was a thrust, a thrust to keep going, a thrust not to quit. Right? And that sort of, that's what is the beginning of a warrior spirit. And that's recognizable by these beings called the timeless seers. Right?
Timeless seers.
Timeless seers, yes. Because you have the various orientations of seers. The old seers, the new seers, the timeless seers. So Carlos and Don Juan brought about the understanding of the old seers and the new seers, the difference between those. But there's a whole other orientation of seers that spans eternity. Right? Eternity is just another dream, right? And it's a much more expansive dream, but and it's a very complex dream, right? So there's many different avenues you can wander down in it.
Let's move away from this noise because it's the background noises.
Do you have noise on it?
Well, there's noise behind you and there's rattling, and it'll all go on the recording. So I want to get your voice really clear of too much background sound.
So this dream has many different avenues. So any direction you go, you'll uncover something interesting. And that's what dreaming is all about. That's what the imagination is all about. The imagination is the royal road into knowledge. If you follow,
Some
it
people.
takes a little dexterity to follow it. It takes what you call dexterity and lucidity. A lot of people just talk about lucidity, but it also takes dexterity. Each one works hand in hand.
How does
Dexterity and lucidity.
how do you use dexterity?
Dexterity is being able, it's not just being able to be conscious, but to make a movement that's a nuance, right? To take another step, right? To, when you just get up and fly, that's a nuance, right? And it adds lucidity to that dexterity, that ability to get up and fly in the dream adds a nuance to the lucidity, so it increases lucidity. Because normally we're bound in our mind that we cannot fly, but when we can fly, we break that bondage. Right? You might not be able to do it here in this world. This world is not very. It's an obstinate world. Right? It's an obstinate dream. It's a dream that has a particular parameter, has a lot of restrictions and limitations surrounded it in its dreaming membrane. And that dreaming membrane is very deep in its onion layers. Right? So in order to defy any of the limitations of it, you have to be able to break through a lot of those barriers, those limitations and restrictions. So that has always been a difficult thing, but the Toltecs were able to do that.
Well,
The Toltecs were able to do that,
uh-huh.
break through some of those limitations, defy the actual law of it, but were they able to do it here or in a figment of here? That is the question.
So another one
When
of the
Carlos jumped off into the abyss, was it in this world or was it in a figment of this world? That is the question. It's this world, you're going to fall flat on your face no matter what you think. You can say, I can fly, but are you going to fly? Probably not. But in this with the narwhal is that it can shift you into its dream, right? And make it seem real, make it seem solid. Because a dream is a relative proposition, right? Sometimes it's it can be very light and airy. You're hardly in it. Sometimes it can be very solid and very physical, right? And so when the narwhal shifts you into his dream or her dream, it's a very solid dream. They're going to be just as solid as this one. And so you're operating under the parameters of the narwhal now, because it's closer to that narwhal energy and further from the tonal energy, right, that this world is configured, that this world has all its limitations, but still the same solidity. Right? So in that world, you can go and knock on a piece of wood. You're going to get an echo, same echo you would get over here. You're going to hear something. You're going to feel something. It's going to be solid, but it's not the same thing.
Okay. Let's move along a bit. Now you mentioned Nahwal as a being, or as
Both.
the both.
Because the narwhal, the person, represents that state of consciousness.
And so, is it necessary if you want to go on this adventure to find a Nahwal to be around, or can you do it without?
Well, that's the thing. This teachings of the death of fire says that you can artificially create other compartments of energy. So
Become your own narwhal.
normally we humans are a two-compartment being. Right? So the first stage of the narwhal is a three-compartment being, and then the more advanced one is the four-compartment being. So a destifier is a seven-compartment being in this tonal reality. So they have artificially created those compartments. So it's possible to artificially create other compartments of energy. And that's the whole idea. The problem with the old seers is that they were manipulative, right? The nuance of the new seers is that they wanted freedom, but yet they were also manipulative, right? They needed a person to manipulate them, to give them that release from the rigid perception. The orientation of the timeless seers is complete independence from any external necessity. That is the difference.
So
There's no promises about anything because it's purely what you do on your path to being an adept, right? But the idea is there. It's important is having the idea because that's the beginning of the intent. That's where we start to imagine something more than ourselves, right? It's like a science fiction, right? Science fiction has allowed us to evolve into science fact. So spiritual fiction allows us to evolve into spiritual fact. Right? That's why people have an issue with Carlos Castaneda. Oh, it's great fiction, but it's not real. But the idea is that spiritual fiction allows us to evolve into spiritual fact. Right? You create the path. The path is created by your perception and by your understanding, and you evolve into it. So it's not what I say, but is what is your imagination is stimulated to reach out of the box and understand something new. Most gurus talk about the ever-present now. Well, I'm talking about something different, the new, not the now, the new. And that's where you go to become renewed, which there are many transcendental realities, some of which are aberrant, and some of which will renew you, some of which are fact-based, some of which will nourish you for eternities rather than drain you of energy. One of the spiritual realities that people are into is this thing called bliss. Bliss is a very interesting thing. It's a passive state that you get in meditation. And so you enter into the void and you are blissful. So a lot of times, as you're being drained of energy, you are experiencing the bliss during that time until you are wasted into nothing.
So you're saying that bliss is parasitic, essentially.
There's a lot of parasites. See, that's what we don't understand is the sensation of the parasite. Right? This one of the dream of the world is ruled by parasites.
One of the questions came from someone called Indira. She was asking you to talk about the foreign installation. Is that essentially about parasites, parasitic?
Well, that's partially. The foreign installations, there are not only parasites, but there are symbiotes. There are things that you can acquire that enhances your perception. Oh, you may pick one up in your journeys through dreamland. You know, you might pick up in your dream. You might pick up a pair of glasses, and you know, in that a vision, you might see a little better, right? And that might stay with you and add to your lucidity. You know, you never can tell.
So that's not necessarily parasitic, but it is foreign. No. Is that what you're saying?
It's
can
a
be
symbiote.
Foreign. It's a symbiote. So a symbiote can be foreign without being parasitic or adversarial, right?
Yes.
Okay.
There are things like that. But you have to have enough lucidity to be able to recognize them.
And to distinguish.
So parasites don't demand any lucidity. They demand a lack of lucidity.
Right.
So the less lucid you are, the more you are vulnerable. Good for their appetite.
Right. You said to me before, and I'm not sure if we got this on record, that what was it? Lucidity and clarity are polar opposites. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes. Well, the example I often use is that Hitler was very clear about what he wanted to do, and his idea of racism he felt was justified. It was the right thing to do. All these things were, real for him. That this is what he's doing the right thing. But, that's the problem with clarity. Clarity often, says your realization, even though it's deficient, is the right thing. Lucidity is a growth process. You learn to look through things rather than to look at things. Right. So when you see anything, you learn to see it from its source rather than how it affects you.
Yeah.
How it's caused. Its cause rather than its effect. Right. And viewing its cause is more amenable to understanding something rather than just to garner an effect. Right? How we feel about something. Often our emotions, our mindsets garner clarity, right? But they don't garner lucidity. Lucidity is a process of awareness, and awareness is unleashed at a place called the source of creation. And this is where everything is assembled. Right? All things have their assemblage at the source of creation, because what it is a place of assemblage. Right? It's not the mold of man, and it's not a deity. It's a place where things are assembled. It's like an infinite field of luminous fibers where luminous fibers interact with each other, building very complex structures that assemble different realities. Right? And this is a place of lucidity. Whereas religions garner their focus of clarity.
Focus of
clarity.
Let's stop for a moment because I want to stop and start.